South Africa's finance minister steps down in the middle of a graft investigation. Will it damage President Ramaphosa, who has promised to crack down on corruption? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Untitled Chapter. The man in charge of South Africa's finances resigned on Tuesday after revealing he met the Guptas, a family at the heart of the country's biggest corruption scandal. Untitled Chapter was seen as one of the closest allies of President Cyril Ramaphosa, who promised to show zero tolerance for corruption after his predecessor Jacob Zuma's controversial time in office. Tito Mboweni, Nene's successor, becomes the fifth finance minister in less than 3 years in a country with a sluggish economy and huge unemployment rate. So, is this a blow to Ramaphosa? Or, given that there's no actual evidence of wrongdoing, by Nene falling on his sword, is this truly an example of zero tolerance in action? Shoaib Hassan has more.
It's the latest challenge for South Africa's government as it battles to restore public confidence in its ability to govern. Finance Minister Tlantla Nene has resigned after he admitted lying to a commission investigating corruption about meetings with the powerful Gupta family.
After due consideration of the circumstances surrounding this matter and in the interests of good governance, I have decided to accept his resignation.
President Cyril Ramaphosa was elected after the ruling African National Congress forced out his predecessor, Jacob Zuma, over growing accusations of corruption and nepotism. At the heart of the charges were his links to the Gupta family. Ajay, Atul and Rajesh Gupta moved from India to South Africa in 1993. 4 years later, Atul Gupta set up their first business, Sahara Computers, which now has an annual turnover of $22 million. South African wealth listings value Atul Gupta at $773 million. The Gupta's business interests now include air travel, energy, technology, weapons manufacturing and media. The directors of their main company, Oak Bay Investments, have included Zuma's son and daughter, Duduzane and Duduzile. This close relationship is said to have been exploited by the Guptas for personal benefit and contributed to the mismanagement of South Africa's economy. The Guptas' influence over politicians is called state capture in South Africa. Critics say it led to a downward spiral in the rand and the appointment of cronies to key financial positions. It also resulted in rising unemployment and anger against Zuma, until he was finally removed by his own party. Corruption cases have since also been brought against the Guptas, who deny any wrongdoing. But the whole spectacle has diminished public trust, something the current president is keen to improve. Nene's decision to admit guilt and resign, despite the commission saying it had found no evidence of corruption, is seen by many as a good move for South Africa. Does his departure mean there's a new standard of accountability in the country? Or is it just a flash in the pan, with the goal of stamping out corruption in South Africa still a long way off? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from London is Xolani Zala. He's the chairman of South African Business Abroad. In Johannesburg, we have Ferial Haffajee. She's the associate editor of South Africa's Daily Maverick. And completing our panel is political analyst Oliver Dixon. He's also a presenter at YFM, a youth radio station in Johannesburg. Thanks all of you for joining us. Ferial, let me begin with you. Nhlanhla Nene, was his resignation necessary?
Well, Imran, I believe that his resignation was necessary because he was found to have lied about how many times he met the family at the center of our state capture or state corruption story. I think that we also need to bear in mind that he was extremely brave and he saved his country a lot of money by refusing a nuclear deal that we really didn't want. So I think that history will look fondly upon him.
Oliver Dixon, was this about the lying or was it about actually meeting with the Guptas at all in Saxon World?
It was about more than just that. it was certainly about meeting them, but I mean, meeting the Guptas alone is not a transgression. I think the content of what had transpired in those meetings is perhaps what he would like to avoid coming into the public domain, and this is why he, for instance, would have stepped down. The EFF claims they have very damning information on him, not just relating to the Guptas, but particularly related to his tenure at the PIC, the Public Investment Corporation, where his son financially benefited while he was the chairperson of the PIC. So that too was a good enough reason for him to resign. There's a clear conflict of interest there, and I think it should have been a case where he discloses information to the public much sooner.
Right. Let me go to Kolani in London. Kolani, there's a bunch of people saying that, well, if everybody who met up with the Guptas resigned, there'd be nobody left in South African politics, right? I mean, I'm not a politician. I met up with the Guptas. They offered me a job as a journalist for their TV station. Everybody met up with them, right? So when we look at beyond that, what is it? Is there something paddling underneath the surface here that we're unaware of, or are you aware of something, Golani?
No, look, first and foremost, you must remember that it's just only 8 months that the current president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is the president of South Africa. You must remember that international investors were unable to invest and have a confidence to invest in South Africa. You are sitting with a president who wants now to raise more than 100 billion, asking international investors to invest. I think what the president have done is not only about Nhlanhla, but is to build confidence for investors to invest in South Africa and boost the economy.
Okay, so building confidence. Ferial, is that true? That if we look at someone like Nene and his alleged transgressions, they seem to be mild, yet he's falling on his sword, which suggests that this is really rooting out corruption. This is an example of really cleaning up the mess. Is that true?
I know we don't have time now, but I'd love to hear more about that job offer you got. I think what this moment does represent for us, Imran, is the setting of a bar at a far higher level than we used to in South Africa, where before somebody would stay on in office even after committing horrible instances of corruption and being caught quite red-handed. Our former president was a case in point. We now have, I think, former Minister Nene, setting a gold standard where if you mess up, you go. It's an ethical as opposed to a technically legal standard, and I think it means good things for our country going forward. The new president, Cyril Ramaphosa, is very much crafting an identity as an anti-corruption campaigner. And for me, this has been a good week. Everybody was worried what the markets would do after we've had about 5 finance ministers in the past 3 or so years. And in fact, they've responded very well to the new finance minister, Tito Mboweni, coming in.
Okay, I'll tell you on Twitter DM about what they said to me in my meeting with them. But let me go to Oliver Dixon.
I'd love to know.
Oliver Dixon, is this zero tolerance in action? Are we seeing zero? This is what zero tolerance looks like.
No, I think we're still far from having zero tolerance as when it comes to corruption in South Africa. I think a number of people who are seemingly corrupt are still holding very powerful positions that the president knows about. So I don't think we should hail the president as a corruption buster just yet until he acts on a number of other ministers. But importantly, I'm very wary that we should be hailing Nhlanhla as a hero of the country. I think a number of things here. One, he stepped down for good reason. That's not an extraordinary thing. That's just the necessary thing to do, the normal thing to do. So hailing him as some sort of hero that puts the country first certainly can't be true if it is in fact the case that he needed to step down. He only needed to step down insofar as he believed he had committed wrong actions. And if he had committed wrong actions, then this is clearly a minister that shouldn't be holding this position.
So Ferial, you say it's the gold standard, and Oliver says this was just merely the normal thing to do.
That's what I love about our millennial generation of editors and journalists. They hold very clear views. I suppose it's because I've seen so many ministers hanging on in office forever, facing the worst kinds of charges, that this for me does seem to have set a standard. Also, Imran, I was at our big commission of inquiry into corruption last Wednesday and listened for many, many hours to the evidence of the former minister Nhlanhla Nene, and really he took many, many punches for saying no to that nuclear deal. I think when push comes to shove, he did the right thing. There's also no evidence that his son benefited from that oil deal because of his personal interference. It looks like it was somebody else's.
And Xolani, as a patriotic South African and an ANC man representing South Africa abroad, has this hurt the president? The president came in, he said he's anti-corruption, he's going to clean up the mess of what came before under President Zuma. He reappoints someone like Nene, and not long after, Nene resigns. In, I guess, the long and the short of it, is this hurting the president?
Look, the president, I think, don't put it as, is this hurting the president? What you should put it more is that have we as South Africans in their diaspora and in the business side of things, that the president have gained more confidence and investors gaining more confidence to invest in South Africa. This is what it's all about. It's not about the president. Because if you merely putting it about the president, I think you will be doing a damage to what he is doing or trying to do as the newly president of South Africa. This what is all about, is to clean up and bring confidence to South Africa. This is what it's all about.
Oliver Dixon, when we've discussed this before, when there was the finance minister merry-go-round, especially under former President Zuma, we spoke about the markets reacting negatively. We spoke about negative or lack of confidence from the outside, even though you believe this was just the normal or the necessary thing to do. As we're hearing from someone like Xolani, outsiders are saying this is good. We are encouraged by this. Are you encouraged by that?
I'm largely indifferent. I think it would be naive to assume that Tito Mboweni is going to step in and redirect the ship into an entirely different direction, even though he is a socialist. Some call him a Marxist. Even though he believes in the nationalization of mines, at least the partial nationalization thereof. He believes in establishment of a sovereign wealth fund, and he believes that South Africa should nationalize the land. Those are all political ideals he holds about our political economy, but it's unlikely that he will steer the ship in that direction. He's going to toe the line that was already established by Malusi Gigaba out in February, that Nene then took over, and he's going to continue that till past the elections, because it would be an unfavorable thing for them to steer the ship in a different direction at this point in time entirely. So whether it's Nene or Tito Mboweni, it doesn't really matter. I think I think Tito Mboweni was the right decision insofar as you care about the aesthetics of the position of finance minister. He's a man of gravitas. He's been in the finance cluster before. The markets clearly love him. So he's the right person to have there as a figurehead of our finance cluster.
Ferio, there was talk of the state being captured. That was the massive anxiety in the nation and the fear under the Guptas. The Guptas' influence over the president and others meant that the state was captured. Is the state now uncaptured?
Not at all. I think we're a far way away from that. But what does give me hope as a South African is that there is political and civil society goodwill to begin that process of uncapturing, to exercise at least an understanding or the truth of what happened to us, to try and ensure that it won't happen again. So I think it's the beginning of something. I think it's going to take us a good 10 years. You know, the former finance minister Pravin Gordhan always puts a figure of 100 billion rand on what was stolen from us, and I think it's going to take at least 5 to 10 years to even begin to make that up and put it into the good work of development.
Right. Xolani, what will be closure for South Africans? At what point will South Africans say, hey, we are uncaptured, or there's been a semblance of justice, if you like? I understand that the Guptas are in Dubai. Would it be an extradition, or would it be former President Zuma actually going to jail for all of this, where South Africans can finally draw a line and say, okay, we're moving forward? What's going to be that point?
I think let's start first to acknowledge what have happened here. You may be aware that South Africa have had a numerous number of commission inquiries. Nothing have happened before. Nobody have been arrested. Nobody have been put into prison or they pay a certain amount of money. We have heard that last time when the former President Zuma was asked to pay a certain amount of money, but nothing happened really in terms of leaving office. For the first time in South Africa, we see such a thing happening where a sitting finance minister, the highest ministerial position in South Africa, steps down. We must congratulate this and see it as a positive sign to bring back South Africa as we celebrate the year of Nelson Mandela, to bring back the vibe of the late Nelson Mandela.
Oliver Dixon, what will it take you to jump out of your indifference and skepticism and believe that the state has been uncaptured?
Firstly, I think if the scope of the state capture commission of inquiry could be broadened a little bit to beyond just the Guptas. At the moment, just the Guptas are being investigated, and for good reason. They did do a number of nefarious things. But I think other than the Guptas, there are a number of other people doing nefarious things. If you would have noticed the furore in the country just yesterday, when it was described to us just how brazenly a bank was heisted over a number of years, using political power, using a political proximity to political power to be able to do that. So it means that beyond just the Guptas, there's a program of looting that's continuing that yields around different political axes, and I think that's what needs to happen for that to be rooted out. I think importantly there needs to be a broader investigation into it, but I think not just an investigation. I think action needs to be taken, and I think that action comes in the form of criminal prosecution.
Oliver, who's doing the looting?
As we would have seen just yesterday, the EFF treasurer in Limpopo, which is our northern province in this country, looted money out of a bank, more than 25 million. And that's something that needs to be investigated. So there's an example over there. If we've seen other cases where in exactly the same instance, money was looted by a fellow closely connected to the second biggest opposition in the party, the EFF. So that too is an instance that worries me. That shows that looting is not just the thing that the Guptas brought. They may have exacerbated it, but looting and corruption exists beyond just that family.
Ferial, is everybody still stealing?
You know, McKinsey stealing, Bain is stealing, KPMG yesterday again shown to not exercise its due standards, multinationals, every level of government. I think what we do have is the truth coming out, and I hope that from truth will come justice, and that the looting will end, because ours, as you know, is a country with huge poverty and unemployment problems.
Right. Interesting. So, Xolani, if I knew nothing about South Africa, I happen to be a South African here chairing this discussion, but if I knew nothing about the country and I met you in London and I asked you about the state of the economy and the state of the nation and its politics, would you be optimistic or pessimistic?
Oh, very much. Look, what is happening currently, it's exciting for business people to come and invest in South Africa. Let's look at this. It's just only 8 months this current president is in office, and he have managed to raise billions so far, and he has a target to raise 100 billions. Just in a couple of days to come now, I think about 3 weeks, he's having an investment conference in Johannesburg. So it's exciting that at least there is a president who talks about creating jobs and investment, is excited to go back and invest in South Africa. There's a lot of things happening that excite South Africans abroad. They're able to vote internationally. We're going to 2019 elections. Nothing so far we have heard about. So there's a lot to talk about South Africa. Unlike if I will talk to you about United Kingdom, Brexit, nobody knows what's happening. Nobody knows what will be happening next year. So uncertainty here in United Kingdom, it's something else in South Africa. As South Africans were grateful. We like this current president because when he came on in office in February, he said he will root up corruption. He will make sure that jobs are created. And I think if we give him enough time, he's acting. Let's be a little bit patient.
Ferial, very finally, I want to circle back to Tito Mboweni.
Yes.
Is he the right man for the job, and what can we expect?
I think he's the right person for the job right now because he could step right into it. He wouldn't be a learner, and we did need somebody almost immediately. Tomorrow, Moody's, the ratings agency, makes a crucial decision for us, and because so much of our debt is held outside the country, that's a vital moment to watch. I think Tito Mboweni could immediately deal with that. In 2 weeks' time, he's got a midterm budget statement to make. I think he has the skill and dexterity to do that. He's well known globally and locally, and I think his economic ideas have been finely tuned over 20 years in public and political service. So I think he's the right person for the job right now.
Okay, Ferial Hafaji, Oliver Dixon and Xolani Zala, it's been a pleasure having all of you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Still to come, Peru's former President Alberto Fujimori and his daughter are heading to jail. We tell you why. And travelers going to New Zealand who refuse a digital search could now face prosecution. Is this a breach of privacy? The daughter of the former Peruvian President Alberto Fujimori has been arrested as part of an investigation into money laundering. Prosecutors accuse the opposition leader of accepting illegal contributions to her party by a Brazilian firm, Odebrecht. Keiko Fujimori says she's being politically persecuted, especially given the timing. Her arrest happened a week after Peru's Supreme Court overturned the medical pardon of her father and ordered his immediate return to prison. So, what's really behind these two court orders? Is Peru hunting the Fujimoris, or is this merely justice in action? For more, here's Haider Abbasi.
I want to ask the President of the Republic and the members of the judiciary just one thing. Please, don't kill me.
Peru's former president is going back to prison. A judge has overturned his pardon, but the 80-year-old Alberto Fujimori says he'll die if he returns to jail. He's in hospital receiving treatment for heart disease. Despite his age and worsening health, many Peruvians want him back behind bars. Fujimori was jailed in 2009 for ordering the deaths of civilians. He was sentenced to 25 years. But in December, he was pardoned by then-President Pedro Pablo Kuczynski. That decision triggered widespread protests in Lima. Lawyers for a victims group successfully challenged the pardon, arguing it violated international law. And things are getting worse for the Fujimori family. A week after Alberto's pardon was reversed, his daughter has been arrested on suspicion of money laundering. Keiko Fujimori is the leader of Peru's opposition Popular Force Party. She served as the First Lady while her father was in power. Alberto Fujimori governed the South American country from 1990 to 2000. People are deeply divided over his time in office. His supporters say he revived Peru's economy and crushed a rebellion by a Maoist group known as the Shining Path. But his opponents say he was a dictator who commanded death squads that massacred innocent civilians. Tens of thousands of people were killed during his rule. Critics say Fujimori's pardon in December was part of a political deal. Just 3 days earlier, Kuczynski was facing impeachment, but he was saved by Fujimori's supporters in Congress. Kuczynski then freed Fujimori for what he called humanitarian reasons. 18 years after Fujimori resigned as president, he continued to enjoy support.
We're going to do everything possible. We're going to prevent, even with our lives, the return of President Fujimori to prison.
So what's the legacy of Alberto Fujimori? Is he a ruthless autocrat or a misunderstood hero? Haider Abbasi, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from New York by Victoria Gaitan. She's a program manager at the Global Americans research firm. And in London, we have Javier Farge, a Peruvian journalist and Latin American analyst. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Victoria, Are the Fujimoris being hunted in Peru?
Well, actually, no. They have been portraying to themselves as being a victim of a political hunt, if you want to put it that way. But the thing is that Peruvian former President Alberto Fujimori had a medical pardon overturned that was granted to him by also former President Pablo Kuczynski in December of 2017, who, as you remember, resigned this year to avoid an impeachment process given corruption allegations. If I may add, Kuczynski actually campaigned on an anti-Fujimori platform and issued the pardon citing Fujimori's medical condition and age. So in a sense, this was a humanitarian pardon, but it raised much opposition because the pardon was viewed as treason at the time and more as a strategic and political deal between Kuczynski and Fujimori's allies, among them Kenji Fujimori, his own son, to consolidate political power in Congress.
Javier, for those who look at the two incidents, the unpardoning and the daughter being arrested within a week of each other and construct a pattern, don't they have a bit of a point?
Well, no, they're not being hunted. First of all, there's no coincidence. First of all, the same judiciary that's investigating Keiko Fujimori is investigating former President Alejandro Toledo, who is a fugitive of justice, is investigating former President Ollanta Humala, who was in prison not long ago, and is investigating also former President Kuczynski. It's a judicial process. This investigation against or on the activities of Keiko Fujimori has been going on for months, so this is not new. It's just a coincidence that it happened when the pardon for Alberto Fujimori, her father, was overturned. We mustn't forget that the Inter-American Court of Human Rights had questioned the pardon which was issued in December last year by former President Kuczynski because it considered that there was no need and there was no need for the pardon to be issued. And there's been videos and audios have emerged which show that President Kuczynski negotiated the pardon in exchange of getting enough votes in Congress not to be impeached. At the end of the day, President Kuczynski had to resign for other reasons, alleged cases of corruption. So no, this is a transparent, clear-cut judicial process against both the Fujimoris.
Okay, so Victoria, even if he's sick, and what if he goes back to prison and he dies soon after because he's very sick? That wouldn't be a good look for the government, would it?
Well, as my colleague Javier mentioned, this has been a very due diligent process and following the legal procedure as it is. Former President Alberto Fujimori has pledged for his life on a public video that he issued and that he recorded from the hospital. And the attorney filed an appeal to the Supreme Court's decision requesting the suspension. But as Javier mentioned, both the Inter-American Court have backed the decision to overturn the pardon. And even President Martin Vizcarra has made very respectful and clear pronouncements on the matter, attributing the decision solely to the Supreme Court. He said he will respect the overturn of the pardon as he respected the pardon itself back in 2017.
Javier, here's something I need to understand. Even though there's not a lot of doubt as to whether he ordered the death of a couple dozen people at the hands of a death squad, I mean, I think there isn't a lot of doubt. You still have a huge chunk of Peruvian society who support the man. Tell me why.
Thank you for the question, because I was thinking about that now. We had in Peru, they had municipal and regional elections last Sunday. The candidate for the Fujimori party in Lima, for the mayor of Lima, got only 2% of the votes. They didn't get a single regional governor and a single mayor, and they had very, very few councillors in the different municipalities in Peru. What does this mean? That the very party that 2 years ago elected Keiko Fujimori with the biggest majority ever as an MP in Lima failed to get more than 2%, more than 3% of the votes in the last municipal and regional elections. There was a debacle for the Fujimori party. So what I'm trying to say with this, Imran, is that yes, there used to be a support, but that support is fading away. People have started to realize, because of the hostility that the majority of the Fujimori party showed towards the government, that this is not good news for the democracy in Peru. So they have lost a great deal of support, and the debacle in the last municipal and regional elections, which has a very high turnout, 80% of people vote, was a sign that the influence of the Fujimori party, for the time being anyway, is fading away.
Yeah, you say for the time being, Javier, but what kind of levers of power do they have, given that they're still the biggest party in parliament? So what kind of levers of power do they have? How can they fight back? They're seeing Alberto Fujimori going back to jail, being unpardoned. They're seeing Keiko being arrested. What are they going to do? What's their next move?
Well, basically, what they can do is create a lot of problems for the government. You know, any proposal that the executive makes in Congress could be ruled out by the majority they have. However, the Fujimori party is divided between Keiko Fujimori's faction and Kenji Fujimori's faction, the son of Alberto Fujimori, who's been suspended now, and he's taken with him some MPs who vote with him. In fact, there was the people who negotiated with former President Kuczynski the pardon of Alberto Fujimori. So what they can actually do is boycott as much as they can in Parliament, and they have the complicity, if that's the word I can use, of the APRA party of former President Alan Garcia, who've been siding with the Fujimori faction until now. So that is what they can actually do. In terms of the judicial process, there's nothing they can do, only just fight back in court, because we mustn't forget that this is only a preliminary arrest, and the prosecutor did that because of fears of absconding. He has 10 days to complete his investigation and set a date for a trial. So that's all they can do, is just fight back in protest, but many people have started to realize that, you know, that the Fujimori party is no longer the force they used to be.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Victoria? Are the Fujimoris losing their influence? And as you answer that, tell me why they had the influence in the first place, even though there's evidence that Alberto wasn't the most pleasant leader around for a decade.
Yes, that's right. I agree with my colleague, but the following he had, or it's explained because when he was president, starting in 1990, he campaigned on an outsider platform. We can say that, and one as a political outsider. He is recognized because he tamed hyperinflation, he curbed unemployment, and he also propelled economic growth and fought curbing cocaine trade. But multiple corruption scandals arise. His movements in particular and the brutality of his methods are highly questioned, and they drew criticism both in Peru and worldwide, raising questions and concerns on human rights abuse that ultimately landed him with charges and in prison.
Is it going to get messy in Congress, Victoria, given that they still have a majority?
Well, that is for sure going to happen, and this follows a series of corruption scandals and corruption allegations and arrests that Javier mentioned earlier. So yes, for sure, we're going to see this getting messy and messy in Congress.
Okay.
Messy and messier, sorry.
Right, okay, and this is interesting, right? So would they be willing, Javier, in your opinion, to sacrifice the stability, the political stability of the country in order to follow this through and double down on this idea that this is political persecution?
Oh yes, because they're going to see what they're going to do now is I imagine they're going to play the victim card. You know, Keiko Fujimori was seen, you know, handcuffed with a cover, you know, on her hands. She was calm, she was composed. She was visited by MPs, by supporters. They said that she's been keeping, you know, calm, and she's been keeping quite sort of composed about the whole business. And they're going to play the victim card that, you know, this is a political vendetta, which we already know is not, because this is a judicial process. So they're going to play that card as the same way they play the same card with President Alberto Fujimori. Whether it's going to work or not, that remains to be seen. Again, the fact that they lost so much support during the municipal and regional elections shows shows that they have a long way to go back to the position they were in 2 years ago when they became the majority in the Peruvian Congress. So it remains to be seen what they plan to do in relation to recovering the initiative that they have actually lost, not only by losing these elections, but also by the arrest of Keiko Fujimori and the withdrawal of Alberto Fujimori's pardon.
And I just want to zero in on the anti-corruption drive for a moment or two, Victoria. Is this something new? I mean, when we read about Odebrecht, I mean, we've read about them in Brazil. They seem to be bringing down politicians across Latin America. Is this something new in Peru, that the courts are getting serious about corruption?
Well, they have been following the case since last year in particular, and if you remember, President Kuczynski was resigned to avoid an impeachment process and corruption allegations. And Keiko Fujimori, right now, the daughter of former Peruvian President Fujimori, is arrested as part of an investigation into money laundering with ties and connections to Odebrecht. So yes, unfortunately, this is everywhere.
It's everywhere. And what does that tell you about the political tone and the judicial independence, Javier?
Well, they have adopted a very independent position. They are not only investigating Keiko Fujimori, as I said, they are investigating former President Alejandro Toledo, who is fugitive at the moment. They are investigating President Kuczynski himself. They are investigating President Humala, which was President Kuczynski's predecessor. They are going after all the political leaders of the country in the last 10, 15 years. So it seems to me that President Vizcarra, who made the fight against corruption a priority of his government when he took over from President Kuczynski, is working. Some people said that the judiciary has been a bit overzealous when they put in prison President Humala, who was released on bail. But it seems to me that there are serious attempts this time, because we mustn't forget that until recently, Keiko Fujimori was a sacred cow. She was untouchable, a Teflon politician who wouldn't be touched. Now she's actually being arrested, and something that no prosecutor would have dared do only some months ago. So it shows, hopefully it will continue, it shows that the judiciary is determined. And not only that, we mustn't forget that a few judges, especially the Superior Court of Callao, which is the main port of Peru, were dismissed and are behind bars now for corruption, because audios emerged that they were colluding with among other people, mainly maybe Keiko Fujimori, although allegedly. So these people have been sacked, and the people who are in charge now seem to belong to a generation of judges and prosecutors who are not corrupt. Even the President Vizcarra is not corrupt. He's not involved in any kind of corruption. And it seems to me that this is good news in terms of fighting corruption. But corruption is so rooted in Peruvian society that it will take a long time for this to be uprooted.
Yeah. And Victoria, can Popular Force survive without the Fujimoris?
Well, they are greatly tied right now, and obviously Keiko Fujimori is recognized as the leadership, but in terms of how can it survive this electoral backlash, it's uncertain. Okay,
it's uncertain. Javier, were they so deeply wedded? The symbolism of the Fujimoris, was it so deeply wedded to the party that the party is dead if they end up in jail?
Yes. I mean, Fuerza Popular is very much the Fujimori's party. I mean, and the siblings fighting one another, Kenji and Keiko, has weakened the party. That has contributed to, in many ways, to the debacle in the municipal elections. One. Second, Alberto Fujimori is very ill. He's frail. He's old. At some point he will probably die if his ailments are true, which means that the big figure of this party, like Perón was in Argentina and Chavez was in Venezuela, once they go, then the influence they have is gone, because they are the glue that puts together different interests within the party. We mustn't forget as well that together with Keiko Fujimori, 18 more people, former ministers, top advisors, top militants of the Fujimori party have been arrested. We're talking about the leadership of the party in prison, and that's going to weaken severely the position of the party, not only within Congress and within the country, but also within the electorate, who again, they showed that they were prepared to vote for anyone else but the Fuerza Popular in last Sunday's municipal and regional elections.
Javier, why do you say if his ailments are true? I mean, as far as we understand, he suffers from a chronic heart condition. Why are you skeptical?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, okay, his ailments are serious enough for him, to die anytime soon. Hopefully, it won't happen because nobody's wishing him to die. But he's weak and he doesn't have all the strength that he had before. And obviously, but the court suggested that the ailments are not strong enough for him to remain in house arrest, and he should go back to prison. But yes.
Okay, got it. Well, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you about the situation in Peru and the fate of the Fujimoris. Javier Farge and Victoria Gaitan, thanks for joining us once again on the Newsmakers. New Zealand has passed a new customs law allowing officers to carry out digital searches on passengers' electronic devices. Under the law, incoming travelers could face prosecution and hefty fines if they don't give the passwords for their electronic devices to immigration officers. Is this an invasion of privacy or necessary to keep the country safe? Well, to discuss this, we're joined from Las Vegas by Thomas Beagle. He's the chairman of the New Zealand Council for Civil Liberties. And in Toronto, we have Dean Correa. He's a security consultant with the Security Executive Council, a US-based risk and advisory firm. Thomas, let me start with you. How do you feel? I guess you're not happy about this new law. Tell me why.
We're not happy about it because I believe it's a unwarranted and unjustified invasion of people's privacy. The issue is it's actually only for customs purposes, and it's also only based on having reasonable cause, which you can't challenge in any way. And unfortunately, people store their entire digital lives on their phones. It gives too much access to government to what's on there.
So, Thomas, I've got your concerns, but when we think about it, New Zealand's hardly the most draconian society around. Why don't you trust that these individual officers would be able to differentiate between reasonable cause and just being mean and going through people's stuff?
Not least, it's because of their history. There's been a history of customs officers abusing their powers to do unauthorised searches on behalf of the police. There's also been a worrying trend in doing racial and ethnic profiling on people coming through the border, particularly picking on the local Syrian expat community.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Dean, you've heard some of the concerns coming from Thomas. Do you accept that maybe New Zealand hasn't properly thought this through?
No, I think that they are doing their diligence, and I think it's important for them to get the information out and allow travelers into New Zealand to realize what the new parameters are of entry into New Zealand and make a decision for themselves. There are many laws and regulations that we help our members with worldwide, and it's something else to consider as you're traveling. For me personally and professionally, there's no law or corporate policy that I've ever experienced in my time with the Security Executive Council that covers every possible innuendo or scenario. I think that they are putting this out, performing their diligence, and then on a case-by-case basis, we'll evaluate whether there is a need to ask you to unlock your phone, providing the password, and not providing the password to them and keeping it to yourself. And in my opinion, there are certain, the climate's changed, the risk climate has changed. And, I equate the analogy with driving every day. Is there a chance that I could be stopped when I'm driving by an officer? Sure. Is the likelihood that I'll be stopped if I'm not abiding to all traffic laws and regulations? Sure. So I travel quite a bit, and I know it's a parameter that I must take my passport. And when I'm at the border, whether I'm asked certain questions or not, I feel that it's something that we need to do, and I trust that the officers will do their diligence before a reasonable search or an invasive search is required of anybody.
Dean, one of the arguments is that, well, you don't have your entire personal life inside your car, right? They're not going to go through everything. You don't have, pictures of your kids or your travel itinerary or whatever that might be. Let me ask you, would you accept and be comfortable with traveling to New Zealand and them asking you to unlock your iPhone and for the customs officer to spend 10 minutes alone with your iPhone? Would you be comfortable with that?
I personally would be. I have nothing to hide. I think that If you are worried about this type of a parameter, you need to think, what just reason could a border protection agency in New Zealand have to search my phone? And I believe that they don't have the time, the resource, or the inclination to search multiple hundreds or thousands of phones without just cause. And if that were to take place, then the public outcry in this day and age, with the way social media, everyone's engaged with social media, would be tremendous, and they would have to adjust, would be my belief. I can point to other parameters put by other customs agencies in other countries, such as having to declare if you carry $10,000 cash or more.
Right. Is that? But Thomas is saying they're picking on, for example, Syrians, right? Is that par for the course? If you're Dean Correa, you're unlikely to have your phone searched, but if you're a Syrian or somebody from the Arab world, perhaps you know what, this is the nature of the world, you just have to let them go through your phone. Is that the reality, Dean?
I don't see any evidence to support that reality. I mean, the New Zealand Public Authority has come out with, there are 14 million travelers in New Zealand recently, and there were something like 560 searches. So I think from a branding point of view, there is no vested interest for law enforcement or border protection in New Zealand to create multiple unwarranted searches. I don't think they have the time or the inclination to do that. And as any regular citizen, whether you're at the border, walking around, driving around, if you feel that the behavior or treatment you receive from law enforcement or everyone else, there's different vehicles that you can choose to voice your concern.
Okay, so Thomas, address that for us. There's no unwarranted profiling happening in New Zealand. There's no evidence for that. Address that, Thomas.
Well, I believe it has been addressed, but I think it's important to note that this law is actually not for the purpose of controlling threats to our country. It's actually for the purpose of stopping the import of certain unauthorized goods. This is a power for the Customs Department. It's for using for customs purposes only, and that's why we believe it's such an overreach.
And do you think it would be used for things beyond customs purposes?
That's what we're partly scared of, that we have laws in our country about when the police and security intelligence services can do things like search phones or get other information. We believe that this is being used as to get around those laws, so it's circumventing the existing laws, the existing restrictions were put in place, and saying that, oh, we can let customs do it at the border, we can suck off all the information off the phone and store it, and then we can keep that forever and use it and pass it on to other agencies.
So Dean, is customs the Trojan horse here? We're saying it's about customs, but actually if we have security concerns about you, that's the real reason we're going to be going through your stuff.
Again, I don't see any evidence. I don't know of any evidence, whether in New Zealand or elsewhere, to support that claim. Could they take your personal information and do something else with it? There's a risk. For sure. I mean, there's the same risk of that happening when you have a social media profile. I believe that the intent is to enhance protection in New Zealand. Electronic crimes have been committed using electronic devices. They are being committed right now using devices, and they will be committed using devices. So I think that it's another layer of protection. It's not a panacea. It's not a one-stop shop, or nothing's perfect. But I think it's another layer that, in considering the crime risk and the environment that we live in today, is a prudent step for the New Zealand government to take.
Dean, would you accept the same if you travel to a country like, I don't know, Pakistan?
Would I accept if they asked me to unlock my phone and view my phone? And again, I think that if there is just cause, I would push back on that if I didn't believe there's just cause, whether I'm in New Zealand, Pakistan, Canada, or wherever. And then we could take it from there in terms of that conversation at that moment in time. As I would, for any reason for them to want to search my person, my vehicle, my bags, whether I'm traveling by car across the border or by plane.
Thomas, help me understand. Is your argument that this is illegal, or that it's legal but it's a slippery slope and it can be abused?
It's legal, but it's, well, obviously it's legal because they just passed a law for it, even though it's against our Bill of Rights. But at the same time, I believe it's not only a slippery slope. I believe it's just an unwarranted intrusion. It's unnecessary. It's unjustified. I mean, we talk about our local situation. We don't have huge amounts of smuggling. If you want to talk at the wider security risks, we don't have a lot of crime. And the last terrorist act was about 30 years ago, and it was committed by the French government. We just don't have the needs to pass these sorts of invasive laws.
So why do you think they've done it, Thomas?
Why I believe they've done it, because I believe that the Customs Department in New Zealand has aspirations to become more of a border protection agency, and they see that as part of that, and because they've got a long history of abusing their powers to support the NZ Police and others.
And Dean, for those who have general fears around the world that we're losing our privacy, we're losing our ability to keep things to ourselves, we're losing, we have all these devices and we have all these wonderful gadgets, but ultimately governments are nefariously trying to scoop up all of our data and might, we don't know, but they might actually use it against us. Is that a general trend, or is it just fear-mongering?
I think it's a bit of both. I think that you can't do this from a security and a risk mitigation point of view. You can't do the same thing over and over again and expect the same results. So there's governments, there's businesses, entities trying different things. And if you have a personal concern, there's certain things that you can definitely do to minimize the risk of your personal information being delivered or going outside of where you want it to be. And I think that, you cannot travel to New Zealand, you cannot have a social media account, you cannot have an electronic device. But I think that laws like this, policies like this are meant to mitigate some of the risk to a broad group of people and on a case-by-case basis, whether you object to it, whether you're offended by it, and that's something you need to address.
Thomas, final word to you.
Final word is that I think that the real problem here is that it's getting at the normal people, because anyone who is doing criminal acts are just going to wipe their phone before they come through the border, and then when they get in the country, they're going to restore it from the cloud. So to me, it looks like an ineffectual measure which is going to catch normal people and not criminals.
Okay, Thomas Beagle and Dean Correa, good to have you on the Newsmakers. Thanks for joining us. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.